This will be recorded and available on the museum website page for these things later on. Okay, and now lecture mode. And now we're going to share a screen. And it looks like all of you are looking at a map, which is perfect. So I think we're underway here. Welcome everybody to the today's Parlor Car Chat. Our topic is the Royal Gorge Route Railroad in Colorado, which is where I am, or at least very close. And to help you envision where all this is, we're looking at a map of Colorado that is just south of I-70. You can see Denver in the upper right-hand corner. South of Denver is Colorado Springs, where I live. And where that kind of orange bubble thing is with the lollipop in the middle, I'm not sure what that's supposed to, that's where the Royal Gorge Route Railroad is. Just kind of on the outskirts of Canyon City. And it runs up a gorge, which we're going to talk a lot about here eventually. And it originally ran, and we're going to talk about more about the history, all the way up to Leadville, which is circled in red on the map. So we've got a few bits and pieces of parts here to be aware of. Just might remember those locations. Now we're going to look at a satellite image of much more closer to the railroad itself. Let me back up a second. We're talking about right down in here. We're about to the next slide that you just got a glimpse of. Is that whole area is only just down in here. It's a much smaller focus because it is literally what the Royal Gorge Railroad runs on now. Down in the lower right-hand corner, that same orange bubble is where the train starts at its headquarters in Canyon City, and it heads out towards the canyon. The canyon is basically the bottom of a gorge that tracks up this way. If you're watching my cursor. In this satellite image, it kind of looks like it's a ridge of a mountain, but it's not. It's inverted to what a ridge of a mountain would be. Instead, it's at the depth of a trench, you might say. So the gorge is the bottom of the trench that runs right along here. This orange line that crosses is roughly the location of the bridge that goes across the gorge that we will see and talk about in a minute. Oh, somebody told me the orange thing is called a pin. So there we go. It's a pin. That's why it looks kind of like a lollipop, but it's actually a pin. Okay. The bridge over the gorge that we will look up at from the train later on as we get going on the thing itself. The gorge is about 1,000 feet deep in its roughly deepest spots. And that bridge is up above the top of the land by a few feet. So it's quite tall, the height of that bridge. We'll talk about that later. And then the train follows the gorge all the way up to Parkdale. It crosses Highway 50, and its stopping point is somewhere up here along the bank of the Arkansas River, which I should have mentioned along the way here. The entire trip, all the way down through the gorge, the train is following the Arkansas River, which, let me mention too, has its headwaters in the Leadville area, up by the Climax mine. So that's where all this river water has been coming from, and of course it's headed out. Okay, so here's a little bit of history to the Royal Gorge Route Railroad. As most places in Colorado and the Western Rockies, in the 1870s, there was a lot of gold and silver rush going on. And at that time, or soon thereafter, the Santa Fe Railroad had already established tracks in Pueblo, Colorado, which is not far from Canyon City. Santa Fe Railroad was in Pueblo, which is not far from Canyon City, and the DNRG, the Denver and Rio Grande, was actually closer to Canyon City with its tracks at the time. And Leadville, where we saw on the map earlier, was about 100 miles away from the gorge segment, or what became the gorge segment of the track. And of course, both railroads wanted to have track all the way to Leadville to bring out gold and silver and other metals from that location. And normally, there's plenty of locations in the world you can name where two different railroads can occupy the same river valley. The one that comes to my mind is up in Canada, going across the Rockies on Via Rail. You've got Canadian Pacific on one side and Canadian Northern, is it, on the other side of the river, and they even cross back and forth on each other across the river. But there was plenty of room for both to lay their own tracks up that river valley. Well, here, that's not the case. As you can see, these are very steep walls in this gorge. That's pretty much what it looks like the entire way. Lots of places where it would be very impractical, if not impossible, to have a separate railroad on either side of the Arkansas River. The closest point, and we'll see it later, where the walls are only 30 feet apart at one place in the gorge. And that's a smidge tight for doing anything, let alone two railroads. Here's a view. This is not my photo, if that's not obvious, because I was down on the railroad tracks for the times I was there. This is a picture from the air looking down onto the railroad tracks at the bottom of the gorge. Those walls are, again, roughly or approaching 1,000 feet, depending on exactly where we are, tall. And there's the Arkansas River running with the railroad along, from our point of view here in this picture, along the left bank. The gorge itself is about 6 miles long, by the way. And the train trip from Canyon City up to Parkdale and back is roughly 2 hours, maybe a smidge over. Here's one of those stereoscopic picture images of the gorge where the hanging bridge was built. And right here where I'm circling, there's the bridge itself where the tracks go over. And this is the structure that allowed them to hang the bridge over the river. There was no room to do a cut of any sort to run the track across, so they had to build a bridge. And instead of putting the bridge on pilings that will go into the water and down to bedrock, they hung the bridge, at least the left side of it in this picture, they hung the bridge from a structure they built of iron or steel, whatever it was, straddling the air gap between the two walls of the gorge. Interesting, in about 1878 is when the two different railroads, the Santa Fe Railroad and the Denver and Rio Grande, both started construction to get their line through the gorge. It was sort of a race from where the two were to get into and through the gorge first. And it had all the drama and whatnot of railroad fights, railroad wars. They they still call them. There were plenty of them around the country. In this case, there were legal fights: who has the right or rights to go up the canyon. A lot of federal lawsuits. actual shots were fired. I don't know that anyone was actually hurt. That seems to be in debate from the histories that I've read, but so shots were fired, the whole thing. By 1880, Jay Gould, who you probably remember from the fore, in terms of the Southern Pacific Railroad, had gotten involved. Money changed hands, and the Denver and Rio Grande eventually ended up with the railroad, this particular railroad. I don't know when this picture was taken. It's not, again, it's not mine. One of the original type locomotives that ran the gorge. As far as I don't think this one is at the facility anymore. I'll show you a picture of one that is here in a little bit. So when the Jay Gould thing happened, though, that was in the almost 1880, I think. Later, let's see, let me get back to, from that point on, 1880, passengers ran up and down the gorge on the way to points north and west, all the way through till 1967. And freight continued on the line until 1989. So it was quite a few decades of service that this railroad saw. And then in 1989, which was when everything sort of, the last thing that was running, which was freight, stopped. That's when the DNRG merged with the Southern Pacific. And then, as we all know from our Southern Pacific history there in San Luis Obispo, it was in 1996 that the Southern Pacific and Union Pacific merger occurred. And then 1 year later, or roughly 1 year later, the Union Pacific, which now included the Southern Pacific, which included the Royal Gorge segment of this line, closed the line, which is called, by the way, the Tennessee Pass line. It went from Canyon City through the gorge up to Salida, I think was the name of the town, on the way to Leadville, and then points beyond. Which, interestingly enough, reminds me, there is actually a railroad company by a billionaire-type agriculture guy out here in Colorado who is trying to reestablish this line to be an alternate route to the current Union Pacific line that goes through Moffett Tunnel to get through the Rockies. This would go in many parts south of I-70, which is roughly where the Union Pacific line runs now. And as you might imagine, there's all kinds of fighting going on again, and kind of another railroad war. He's having, as you might imagine, quite some difficulty getting permission from the current owners of the gorge segment, which is a combination of the tourist train people and another railroad called the Rock and Rail Railroad that does more freight, industrial kinds of things. So anyway, the UP sold the gorge in 1997 to this partnership of the Canyon City and Royal Gorge Railroad and the Rock and Rail Railroad. And its partnership was referred to as, where did I put that? The Royal Gorge Express. And that's who has been operating the tourist railroad since 1999 or thereabouts. And just as a side note, it's still dispatched by Union Pacific. Let's see, next slide. And here we go. Now we're roughly current time. I've been out on this railroad twice since we've been here. Once in 2017 or 18, and then again 19 or 20. So this can't be more than about 3 years old. Looking at the station for the Royal Gorge route from one angle, and let's see, we can click a little bit, and whoop, there's the same station, the back side of it. This is the train side of the station, looking at it from another angle. And I mentioned there is a locomotive there now, just sitting on the track as kind of an exhibit. This number 8. I don't know much of the details about it, when it ran, for instance, when it was retired, any of that sort of thing. But it's not number 40, as far as I know, that we saw earlier in a much older photograph. There's number 8 again, with the Santa Fe logo across the way. Santa Fe was actually the one who constructed most of the route during the quote-unquote struggle for control. And when DNRG got the route, they had to pay for that. And as I recall, it was $1.7 or $8 million is what they paid Santa Fe to get the rights, or to end up owning, if you will, the railroad. Which I understand, or someone mentioned in the readings, that that was about $400,000 more than what it actually cost Santa Fe to build it. So you can't feel too sorry for the Santa Fe Railroad, I guess. They did get some sort of profit of sorts, maybe not what they could have earned over 30, 40, 50 years of use, but they did get something. One of the times I was there was at Christmas, and they, as you might imagine, being a tourist railroad, they pretty much go all out for Christmas stuff with Santa Express trains and the like, decorate everything. I don't know if you noticed in the picture of the locomotive, you can see the Christmas lights hanging along the walkway here. Here's one of the locomotives. I think this is the one we rode that day. That the Royal Gorge Route uses. And I think if the next, yeah, there's a picture of one of the other locomotives, a more modern one that's also used. Here's a picture of what train side looks like. This amounts to the platform. You go through one of about 5, I think, gates. When you leave the station, walk towards the train from that back side that we saw a little earlier, you eventually get to this fence line where there are about, I think it's 5 gate openings, and that's where you wait for the train crew to direct you to the car that you're headed for. And the day we were there were quite a few cars. Like a dozen, I'm thinking. There might be a picture of a full train later on. I don't remember. But so quite a few people. Here's a shot inside of one of the Vista Dome cars, which is the way we were traveling that day, where they have full lunch service. It's really nice. We must have been one of the first people on, because it looks like they're kind of still setting up there, inviting people in. There's another shot inside that car. I love Vista Dome cars. They're great. Here's one of the coaches. They have a number of different fare classes, you might say, from coach all the way up to the Vista Dome with lunch kind of class. Just so it's clear, there are adult beverages available. That's my daughter and son-in-law in that picture. We were obviously having a very good time. And the picture's pretty good, actually. One of the first things you see leaving Canyon City as you head towards the gorge and then on up it is a prison, which in this picture you can see the sort of the top parts of some of the prison buildings there. Obviously, the main thing I'm trying to show in this picture is the rock wall, natural rock wall behind it, which isn't so natural anymore because they mined all the rock from that wall to build the prison. Talk about having your supply right next to your location. I mean, they have zero transportation costs to build that prison out of rock. And you can see, if you look here, you can see how they chopped it. There's a lot of angular, square angles in a rock face where you would not expect nature to do a lot of right angles in a rock face like this. Not that it doesn't occur, but it's highly unusual. And here's a built from that rock, a little guard turret outpost from the facility just on the south side. This is about the last prison thing you see as you head on into the gorge on the train. Oh, and just in case you weren't sure if they had real adult beverages, not just the easy adult beverages, they do. It's a full bar. Okay, here's a shot of more of the train. You can see the two locomotive units on the front. Second car back is that Vistadome car that we just saw the inside of a couple times. Then a coach car, and then there's an open flat car, which is where I spent a lot of time. You can see everybody's bundled up. This was a Christmas time, December train. So it was kind of cold, but definitely sunny. I think the temperatures were in the 60s, and we'll see some kind of colder things later on this morning. But this was the place to be. Unobstructed views of the river, the Arkansas River, and the canyon. You can tell we're not quite into the gorge itself yet. We're still in the process of getting out of Canyon City and getting on up to where the gorge is. And there's a few interesting little tidbits along the way. This little zip line gondola, I'm not sure what you'd call this, that you can zip across the river, and I'm not sure who owns it or what they use it for, but there it is. There's a old structure. We'll see more of this. I think this is part of a water line that was constructed along the side of the gorge to get water down the river in certain circumstances, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But we're still on our way to the gorge, so to speak. This is really along the river where it's not nearly as spectacular. This is part way up the river on the way to Parkdale, as shot from the train. Sort of a fancy camping location. I think you can rent those for overnight stays. But also one of the main things that happens here is you can see there's a road down to the river edge. There is rafting along this segment of the river/railroad. And it can get pretty exciting. It's definitely the 4s and 5s if you're into river rafting and know the number scheme. This is up there, at least at certain times of the year when the water is really flowing. There's a better shot or more shot of the train following along the Arkansas River. This must have been the other trip, because we've got a different set of locomotives on the train this time. But you can see the Vistadome cars, the coach cars, the open air flat car. It's a really very nice train. Now we've made it all the way up to Parkdale. We sort of skipped over the stuff in the gorge, which we're going to go back to in a minute and cover. But this is the other end of the trip. The train comes, I think, from the other side of the bridge, as this picture is showing it. Pulls under the bridge, goes up just a few hundred yards, and stops right here, as the whole thing is along the river, so you're always along the river. And waits for the clearance to head back down the hill and heads back down the hill. That's Highway 50 that you see crossing the Arkansas River at this point. So the train goes up under Highway 50, stops, heads back down to Canyon City. There's just a pretty shot of the train along the river. I have told you I was going to show you a picture of just how cold it was, the one December trip we made. There was still plenty of ice along the river, and and the way it worked makes these very interesting formations, I thought. I was kind of captivated by how pretty that was. Of course, the river itself never freezes. It's in way too much motion for that to happen. But around the rocks and so on, water can get sort of frozen off or pulled off by freezing and make these formations. They're really pretty cool, if you get the pun. Another shot of the train along the river. I took these pictures from the train, so that's how long it was. I was up and around the corner. I do have a telephoto lens, but still, there are a few cars between me and the part of the train that's in the picture on the left. Another nice picture. Gorgeous ride. You suppose the word gorgeous comes from gorge? Huh, I hadn't thought of that. Here's another remnant piece up along the river of the water handling, I think it was, system. And I think we might be getting into those pictures. No, not quite. There's I think that the same building that was here, oh no, it doesn't look right. There were a couple of buildings up there where supervisors or managers who actually lived up there to work or maintain that water line lived and worked out of. So there's a number of outbuildings like that up here. There's another pretty picture of the ice. There's a nice kind of sweeping view into the gorge. One of the structures built to maintain the railroad. I think we're draining water off of you can see there's ice at the bottom of this channel. I think we're draining water, maybe gravel or rock debris, rock fall, but I think it's water off of the gorge to the left. And you can also see another drainage output underneath the tracks through this tunnel or casing. Here's a part of that water line that I was talking about, a wooden water line made not unlike wine barrels are made, with these iron straps around it that went quite a long way along the river. I think it was, if I remember right, it was a way for Canyon City to get its water supply at times when they couldn't just take it out of the river down in the Canyon City area. Because, with variations in seasonal flow and how fast it was running and all that sort of thing, I can easily imagine there would be times when it would be way too turbid. There would be way too much stuff in the water to make it particularly easy for the water system of the time to handle. So what they did was bypass the fast and turbid parts of the river during those seasons by taking water from the river way upstream, running it down this pipeline alongside the stream to feed the city water supply. There's another shot of the dilapidated remains of that water line. And you can see they tunneled through. There's the opening to one tunnel. Here's the opening for another tunnel. They had to tunnel through rock, and this was all done by hand to get past spots where it wasn't particularly practical to try to run the water line around the outcrop of rock. There's a closer view of it where you can see the strapping, the cables that held it to the rock, the wooden boards that made up the outside of the water line. And you can even see here some of the interior core lining for the wood, which has disappeared down here. Unless this was maybe just for a junction, that's possible too. I'm not exactly sure how this thing is constructed. This is very reminiscent of what you see and feel like on the train. Okay, I mentioned earlier that there is this bridge that goes across at the top of the gorge walls from one side to the other. There's a shot of it from the train. No doubt I took it from that flat car that has the unobstructed view. There's another view of it that I took. And here's a shot that I did not take. I found this, I think it might have been from the website for the Royal Gorge Bridge Company, which is the operator of this bridge. You can still cross this bridge. Passenger vehicles can cross the bridge during the day, I think. And if it's anything bigger than a passenger vehicle or whatever size that white bus thing is, cannot go across. No big trucks, no big buses, none of that sort of thing. It's really just it's another tourist attraction. It's also part of a 360-acre amusement park that's on this side of the bridge, the side that the photo was taken from. There's all kinds of stuff you can do, as you might imagine, at any amusement park, from things to eat and fun things to do, and galleries, and water gun galleries to shoot, and so on and so forth. There is also, and I think we have a picture of it. Oh, this is historical in nature. There was a funicular railway that ran from the bottom of the gorge up to where the bridge was. Oh, and by the way, the bridge was built. Let me go back to that for a second. I'm misreading that. In 1929, and it actually remained the highest bridge in the world until 2001, at 955 feet is the exact measurement, I guess, that they give the bridge. And after that, there were two bridges in China, I think, that took over. So it fell back to third place. And it was in the top 10 for the longest time until not that many years ago, a handful of years ago, enough bridges had come along by then that it got bumped out of the top 10. But that was only a few years ago. Okay, so the funicular, also built in 1929, took people up and down, down from the top of the gorge all the way to the bottom and back up again. Unfortunately, it was heavily damaged in a fire in 2013, so it almost ran for 100 years. It would have been 16 years short of that, so 80-some years. And it was never repaired. So I don't remember seeing, I don't know if there's any remnants of those tracks there anymore, if they just kind of cleaned it up or what. I don't remember seeing that. I also don't remember knowing that it was there the first couple of times I went up along the railroad, so I may not have known to look for it. And here's another shot, not of mine. It looks like a kind of a drone shot of the bridge, giving you kind of a feel for just how high above the floor of the gorge this thing is. It's pretty spectacular. And here's what, remember I mentioned that out of that amusement park at the top of the canyon walls as part of that bridge deal, there's a gondola thing now pictured here. There's also a zip line that you can go across if that's to your fancy. So there's a lot of fun stuff to do up. We have yet to go to that park and enjoy the gorge from above, you might say. Every time I go, I want to go on the train. So someday it'll happen. It just hasn't happened yet. There's another one of those cool ice pictures. There is a little Christmas village along the tracks. We're almost back down the hill now back to Canyon City, sort of like the end of the trip. And we were there in December, the train didn't stop or anything. It was, at least this particular train didn't stop, so we just got to enjoy looking at these buildings as we went by. I think, though, if you were to take their Santa Express, or whatever they call their North Pole Express, that the train does stop here for some sort of event, or hot chocolate, or handing out candy canes or something up here. This is not far from the station. There's a really nice picture of the, and that gives you some sense of how narrow that canyon gets. Lots of wildlife up there. I think these are longhorn sheep right here. And I think there's another one. Oh, there's another shot of the train in the gorge. You don't get tired of that view. That 2 hours ends way too fast. Oh yeah, there's another of those big longhorn sheep that they were there. We spotted them readily from the train. Okay, now we're almost back down to Canyon City. We're probably not more than a track mile away. Again, it's still alongside the Arkansas River, and you can see a cut of coal cars. I don't know if they were empty or not. I don't remember if they actually were used for coal or not, or what. But there is railroad activity down by here. And also near town, you find fishermen doing their thing along the riverbank. It looked pretty inviting, actually. Here's a shot along the train. You can start to see now sidings are developing. The yard is starting to develop. Out front of the train, you can see just a little bit of those coal cars that I mentioned a minute ago. Okay, now we've sort of left the timeline again. Now we're back roughly in the middle of the gorge where this hanging bridge is. It's not very far from where the bridge over the canyon is built with the amusement park and everything. But you can start, I took these pictures, of course, to show you what some structure looked like that spans the canyon. Here's one of the big girders. It goes from one wall on one side up to a point outside of the picture, and then back down to the canyon wall on the other side to suspend, and you can see at least one of the suspension cables right here, to suspend this edge of the waterside edge of the bridge. And all these people are on that, again, that observation flat car. That's how close it is. There's not much more, or in fact, there's no extra room on that bridge for anything besides the train. There's where the support beams come in on the train side of the river. This is not my picture, obviously, because none of us were ever off the train during the trip. So obviously a professional photographer took this for the railroad. But you can get a much better idea of what that support system, the suspension bridge, is like, for what they refer to as the hanging bridge. And there's another picture, obviously again not mine. I wasn't ever off the train. You can see how the support comes up from one side and then down and into the other side. How you would ever think you could build two railroads through this river valley. Well, no wonder they fought over it, because everybody knew only one was going to end up with it. Well, there's those rafters that I said. The Arkansas River, through the same segment of track, is used for river rafting. It gets pretty exciting. I have done rafting on the Arkansas River, but we did it well upstream of here, where it was much calmer, like class 3 kind of level rafting, which was exciting enough for me. Another nice shot. And that's it. So let me get back in here and open up, see if there's any questions or answers, questions or comments anybody wants to make. And while I'm getting all that turned, let me take this opportunity to say, A, thanks for joining us on this Parlor Car Chat. And second, there's a couple of things on this last slide. One is the Parlor Car Chat's web page, which is that address at the top, where you can find what's upcoming. You can find listings of all the programs that have already occurred. And the important thing there is there are links to the things I talked about, and there is a link to a video audio recording of the session, so you can go back and watch it anytime you want to. The second item down there, the feedback survey. If you would let us know if you like these, you want more of them, do you have specific topics in mind. It's just a brief couple 3-minute survey for you to help us program any remaining Parlor Car Chats that we might do. And then lastly, an announcement of next week's Parlor Car Chat. The topic will be fall colors in Colorado as seen by speeders. I got to take a speeder excursion with the Motor Car Operators online. What do they call them? Motor Car Operators West. That's it. That organization did a speeder trip out here the fall that we moved out here, 2017, and we'll be looking at a number of railroads that we covered during that week. In fact, this topic is going to cover 2 weeks, 2 different sessions. We're going to do part 1 next Saturday at 10 o'clock, and then 2 weeks after that, on the 15th, we're going to do a combination of finishing the Fall Colors by Speeder part 2. We're going to combine that with a kind of a quick look at the other 150th anniversary Golden Spike ceremony that's going to place, that would have, had there not been coronavirus, would have taken place in Strasburg, Colorado, which is just up the road from us. They claim that they were the first to complete, or that spot was the completion of the first truly transcontinental railroad. We'll take 10 or 15 minutes to talk about that. It's kind of cute. And since it's right in my backyard, I figured I'd fill in the session with that. So that's all I have to say at this point. So does anybody have any questions they want to ask? Comments?
This is Walt. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, sorry about, I'm getting an echo. Sorry about that if you are.
It's not too bad.
So I used to live in Littleton, Colorado, and went down to the gorge for this ride on a weekend, and the second locomotive in your 2 locomotive shots, the blue one, which is a former New Jersey Transit passenger engine, broke down and stranded us in the gorge for quite a while.
Oh my.
And but I thought their customer service was excellent. After they got us back to Canyon City, they gave everyone a free return trip, including an upgraded ride, I believe in the, if I recall, this is some years back, in the dome car. But some of their power, motive power, is very secondhand, and it's a great ride, but you also have to be prepared for the unexpected.
Well, since I'm 2 for 2 without having any problems, it might be my time, huh? Next trip. Interesting.
Well, if it gets you a complimentary ride in the dome car or one of their cab rides, that might be worth it.
That's right. Oh yeah, thanks for mentioning that cab ride. This is one of those tourist railroads that makes that option available to you. Obviously, there's only 1 or 2 people that can do that each trip. And I looked at that the other day. It's like $179 for an adult. And it's something less than that if you want to take someone under 18 with you, but they have to be at least 13 to do it. And if you're between 13 and 18, you have to have an adult go with you. So it's two of those 179 and something less than 179 fares to do that. But you can bet your bottom dollar that I'll do it at some point. Anyone else? Questions or comments? Did someone try and jump in there? Okay. Well, I guess I did. Thank you. Thank you very much for. I can't tell if somebody's trying to join or not. I think not. All right. Let's call it quits. Keep track of what's happening on that Parlor Car Chats webpage, and we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.